Hello, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Well, it's time to see what's making headlines with the political commentator Benedict Spence and the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Thank you both. So let's take a look at what is on those front pages, and we'll start with The Guardian, which leads with Labour's accusation that the Prime Minister is asleep at the wheel over the government's response to the flooding. The Times reports on the Post Office facing a police inquiry over the IT scandal which saw hundreds of people wrongly convicted. Prince Andrew is the subject of the Daily Mail's front page, which calls on the Met to reinvestigate claims of sexual assault. The Daily Mirror headline, "Goodbye, Darling Derek," pays tribute to the husband of television presenter Kate Garraway, Derek Draper, who's passed away after a long battle with COVID-19. The Star quotes Kate Garraway, "Rest gently now, Derek, my love," as does the Daily Express, describing Kate Garraway as heartbroken. While the Sun focuses on the couple's last moments together. The Daily Telegraph leads with the resignation of Chris Skidmore over the government's plans to allow the extraction of fossil fuel from the North Sea. And the Eye's top story, rat infestations in several towns across the country apparently made worse by disruption to rubbish collections. And the Financial Times carries a story about the fallout from a cyber attack at the British Library, which cost a reported £7 million. And to remind you, by scanning the QR code you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. Now, as I said, tonight we're joined by Benedict Spence and Susie Boniface. Welcome both. It's not too late to say Happy New Year, so have a happy 2024 to you both. And those people who are flooded out not having a happy start to the year. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian, a picture there of a woman carrying a younger person on their back through flooded waters, and the reporting there that the government is under some criticism, Benedict, for not doing enough.
Yes, the headline, Sunak asleep at the wheel. And we get flooding sort of every couple of years in this country, and it's one of those things where you kind of think, is it really of any sort of great comfort to the people who are going through a very difficult time for the Prime Minister to turn up and say, yes, we dropped the ball, sorry about that, and I'm going to have a photo opportunity now and leave. It's one of those things where I think ultimately, because it happens so frequently, actually, because we're unable to sort of get to grips with whatever it is, dredging in some cases or flood defences in others, that somehow if the Prime Minister were to turn up, that would make things better, and it just doesn't. And I think ultimately you also see here the Environment Agency, according to The Guardian, has blamed the climate crisis. And you kind of think, well, isn't that an easy cop-out to just blame the climate crisis for a lack of management? You know, fundamentally, it's all very well sort of say they're going, oh, yes, the heavens have opened and climate change is very difficult. But ultimately, it does require planning, and it does require a bit of forethought. And it is one of those things where, you know, floods are not unusual, actually, in a country that experiences as much rain as this one does, especially in January. Yep. Why is it that it keeps on happening every couple of years? Especially when houses are built on floodplains as Doesn't help, does it?
It's happening every year, pretty much. And whereas in previous instances, I think you tend to have one town or one village that's most seriously affected by some bad weather. At the moment, we've got half the country underwater. And you've got the situation where if Rishi Sunak were to turn up now in his helicopter in Tewkesbury, I don't think anybody would think that was in any way beneficial, because he's just going to get drowned by an angry mob. And what you've got here is a situation where we have a Prime Minister who is incapable of emoting or showing any kind of, as David Cameron tried to and failed in like 2014, 2013 floods in Kent and in Somerset, and turned up in his welly boots, freshly bought at the service station on his way there, and tried to say, oh, it's terribly grateful. Sunak just can't even do that. No one wants him.
So does he have a problem with that sort of emotion thing? Because some of the
relating to anybody, because everyone knows if his house floods, he would just build it out of diamonds or move the house or move the river or something. These people can't do that. And you've got the situation, you've got half the country underwater, you've got serious floods that are happening increasingly often, and they're getting worse. And we have a situation where he's turning up and doing a little piece to camera saying, oh, everyone should be very glad the Environment Agency has been out and is helping. You've been reporting all day on this channel and in others about the local heroes who are turning out to take people to the hospital because no one else is doing it, who are pumping out their mates' houses and all the rest of it because no one else is doing it. In November last year, just over a month ago, the Environment Agency announced it was cutting the number of houses it would have to defend from floods by 40%. It was cutting the number of flood defence projects by a quarter. And the reason for that was because of inflation. The budget that it had been given was not enough to cope with the insane policies of Liz Truss and the disaster that left our economy. And as a result of all that, we've got a situation here now where it turns out if the Prime Minister were to turn up, everyone would just want to lamp him.
Well, he was, I think, heckled. Altrincham, I think he was today.
Yeah.
And there was some booing. Let's just look at the front page of the Eye. They've got a sort of a picture there of some of the flood damage. I mean, we've got some great aerial shots as well that Sky News helicopters has shot today. And look, this is the problem. We've talked about sort of the flood defences and the investment. I had the Environment Agency on the other day and they were telling me about the billions that have been spent recently to do exactly this, to mitigate from flood damage, to be able to dredge the rivers and remove all the silt, but it's not having the effect.
Well, I mean, the scale, I think, is more the question. I mean, we are having an exceptionally large amount of rainfall at the moment, but also if you build lots of houses on floodplains, as we've done sort of over the years, you are going to get more and more properties get at risk of being flooded. And I think, you know, I come from a very small sort of market town in Suffolk, which is built directly above a floodplain. So every year, the entirety of the surrounding area, it floods, but the town does not. And, you know, it's all very well when we talk about sort of growth in this country. You know, we need houses, though we have got a massive shortage of them, but you do need to plan ahead of time. There are reasons why you don't use some fields and you do use others. That needs to be borne in mind. But ultimately, if you have a slowdown in growth in this country, as you have over the last decade or so, in which the fiscally conservative party of government has been in power, if you don't have that kind of growth, you don't have the same amount of financial resources to actually meet the needs of a growing population, of an expanding population in areas like this. And the thing is, you know, we can talk about how much money you spend dredging one river. Fantastic. Next year it needs to be dredged again. It keeps on happening.
Look at those houses, though. They aren't recent ones. They've been there for half a century, and or even longer, some of those. And human beings have always lived in floodplains because it's the most fertile bit of the country to live in. It's to do with how resilient we are, how we deal with the floods, how we can pump the water through, how we expect the catchment area to direct the water, and if they're spending the money on the wrong things. And frankly, nothing is going to happen about this. We've got a Prime Minister who's just decided that meeting net zero is sort of an optional priority, a bit like, you know, my opening that yoga app in New Year. It's a priority. I'm not necessarily going to do it straight away. But that's what we've got. And frankly, nothing is going to happen until West London floods. When West London looks like that, then when Kensington High Street looks like that, things will get done. When it's Tewkesbury, no one's going to give it to
the canal in Hackney flooded. I don't think that quite had the effect on the that you're expecting. All right, let's stick with the kind of topic, because front of the FT, and this story that's covered in many of the papers, is Chris Skidmore resigning over exactly this sort of thing, the government's pledge to reach net zero. Skidmore resigning and complaining about the fact that there is legislation coming that will allow more fossil fuel extraction from the North Sea.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm afraid, the massive issue that the government has and that the future incoming government is going to have as well. And that is, of course, when we're talking about the massive impacts of things like inflation on this country. A large part of that is because actually energy has become very expensive, and that is because we don't necessarily produce enough of it ourselves. We are entirely at the mercy of international trends, of wars, of other players who decide that they are going to increase the prices, that they're going to artificially inflate, be that Russia, be that in the Gulf. What this government has decided is that one way that we're going to try and alleviate that is North Sea oil. Whether or not that is the right move, given that the government has previously said we want to go to net zero, it is a little bit of a confusing move, I think, for a lot of voters to hear that. But
like
what all this comes down to...
yoga app, but I'll keep on eating pies.
I have to say, though, this comes down, ultimately, to a failure of long-term planning. If you want something that is sort of... It meets in the middle in terms of cost and environmental friendliness. It's going to have to be a combination of wind, of solar, but also nuclear. And ultimately, we're all harking back to the coalition days and Nick Clegg saying, "Oh, well, they're not going to come online." And it is that lack of foresight, I'm sorry, that has led to this situation ultimately. And I'm just pleading for a government to think of something beyond a couple of news cycles, beyond 2 or 3 years.
And on the fact that Skidmore is quitting and there's going to be another by-election, what's that, 3 now that we're going to have in the coming weeks and months.
On top of the Umpty Tumpty we had last year, 6, I think it was. It's all going to go badly. And this thing that we had during the week of Sunak saying, oh, no, there's going to be an election some point in the autumn. He's not going to make it that far. I need him to just wake up and sniff it.
No, well, this is Susie's theory,
that's who he is. He's a helper. But he's got 3 by-elections coming up. He lost 5 last year, and he won one of them. He's got another 3 coming up.
Local elections
he's got local elections in May. He's got the Rwanda emergency legislation coming through and getting picked apart very early in the new start of the Parliament. And I suspect that he's just not. He's got a party around him that are just in the state of generally just throwing all their toys out the pram.
I'm sure that he is in a very perilous situation. I certainly agree with that. The question is, who else is out there who is mad enough to take on this mantle at this moment in time?
I
regret opening my mouth. That's correct.
I think that's why she's lurking. That's why she won't be flushed. She's just sitting there waiting.
Like a shark in the floodwaters, she's lurking. But I think that's the key thing. I think that that's the key thing, though, is that, you know, actually who is the ambitious and credible candidate who is looking at this situation and thinking, yes, I will step into the breach now. It would only be somebody probably who is not as good as the current incumbent. And I suspect even the majority, perhaps not all, but the majority, just about, of Tory MPs might look at some of those candidates and go, do you know what? Actually, no, maybe this isn't the moment to get rid of the Prime Minister. Let's at least try to make it to the general election. I don't think it'll be pretty. I think you're right. It's a very precarious situation.
And then the longer he goes as well, the more chance of events going his way.
That's all he's got going, isn't it?
Worse. In Rishi Sunak's tenure, things have only got worse. The polls have only got worse. The economy's only got worse. Things have only got worse. And he's going to get to the point, I feel, that he's just going to go, oh, sod this, LA's calling, and throw everything to the winds and go for an election, because he's not going to be able to govern past, I think, Easter. OK. All we have for this segment, but you guys are going to stick around, as we said, until nearly midnight. Plenty more to come on our press preview. We're looking at the coverage of the death of Derek Draper. She held his hand to the end, Kate Garraway says, after her husband, Derek Draper, dies following his long battle with COVID-19. More on that next. Hello there and welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With us are Susie Boniface from the Daily Mirror and Benedict Spence, political commentator. All right, guys, let's look at the front page of the Times. Interesting reporting here. Susie, why don't you take us through? I'm just looking at a bit how I flaunted my cellulite, and that's not what you're talking about.
I've already clicked on that link and it's very interesting article. We'll talk about that another time.
It doesn't help me get famous, I'm afraid. No, so the Post Office, which, of course, most people will be aware, oversaw this horrific scandal. For more than 20 years it's been going on. Sub-postmasters and mistresses accused of stealing money because of a computer system that was totting things up wrongly. It wasn't their fault at all. They lost their homes, they went to jail. Barely anybody has been held to account for it. And now there is a Metropolitan Police probe underway, potentially at last, finally, which should have been happened decades ago. There's been plenty of reporting about it, to look into the fact that apparently when they've clawed money away from those sub-postmasters, having decided they were guilty, that went into post office profits, and they're looking into that and whether or not it may constitute fraud.
Yeah.
And new potential victims have come forward because of the documentary that's been on ITV. But it's just the whole thing, the fact that we have to get to this point in 2024, when this was happening at the end of the 90s, and it's been reported in Private Eye and other places for decades, is just sort of astonishing. And now they're sort of vaguely looking to whether this is a bit grim. Of course, it's a bit grim.
I mean, it's been described as the biggest miscarriage in justice in British history. Would you go that far, Benedict?
Perhaps not the biggest, but it's certainly up there. And I think also that the length of time in which it's rumbled on, but it also, I think, goes to show just sort of... I don't want to say sort of how much the esteem with which the Post Office was held has fallen, but how much people used to care about it, perhaps don't so much, that it was able to go under the radar for quite so long. It's been a bit of a slow burner, and it's sort of come to the fore very recently. But even now, I don't think there's the level of outrage that actually it might have garnered sort of 10, 20, 30 years ago had it come to light at the time. But you know, also, he sort of piecemeal suggestions about how we can solve this. I think it was yesterday there was a suggestion that the former head of the Post Office might lose their CBE over this. Yeah. It's one of those things you think, well, of course they should lose that, but that's not going to help these people.
People died with these wrongful convictions.
Yes, this is a dreadful thing. It's such a small token to say, oh, maybe get rid of the CBE. I think that is surely the starting place with all of this. 700 people that we know of, that potentially more people coming forward, livelihoods ruined, an institution, reputation completely in the mud.
Yeah.
And even now, we're just sort of sat there going, oh, well, isn't that very sad?
I think part of it is because of the sell-off of Royal Mail. This happened when it was a government-run organisation. Because it's now private, and therefore some of the legalities have happened as a private company dealing with these things. I think it's kind of just the government's been, oh, it's nothing to do with us. It's not us anymore. And actually, if the government has been involved in what was quite clearly a gross miscarriage of justice, potential cover-ups of potential criminal offences, then that is just as much of a scandal as Hillsborough, as Grenfell, as the nuclear test veterans, as Orgreave, as everything else that the government has covered up over the years about the way it has treated the littlest, I say that in the inverted commas, the little people in our country. And sub-postmasters and missions were part of the community, decent, nice, upstanding
decent,
people.
like, local business operators,
It's like claiming the vicar was on the take.
Yeah.
You know, it is astonishing. And if the government was part of that. And that's the thing. It has been allowed, the reporting of this has been allowed to move away from it being the government doing this to people to being, oh, it's just a company, it's a computer, and got things wrong. It's a bit of a
dodgy software.
It's another thing that there needs to be a public inquiry for, and the list just keeps on going up and up and up. And you think, well, what a country that we just have to keep on having public inquiries because things just magically go wrong.
Lessons need to be learned. All right, and finally in this section, let's look at many of the newspapers are reporting on the death of Derek Draper and the tributes paid by Derek Draper's wife, Kate Garraway. That's the front of the Express there. You can see the Sun talking about the final moments that the couple had together. The Star, a quote from Kate Garraway, rest gently now, Derek, my love, and the Mirror, goodbye, darling Derek. I mean, the documentary that she made was very touching. Of course, the family has now been torn apart by this, and she's really become a campaigner for people understanding the way that long COVID works and the way that families can be affected by it.
Well, exactly. The pandemic isn't over. There are 1 million people with long COVID in this country, and many of them are off work. I know a friend of mine who's a former war correspondent who's now registered disabled and walks with a stick. He used to have a go bag by his door to rush off at a moment's notice to somewhere terribly exciting with the military, and now struggles to get to Tesco's. And that is happening. I mean, feel for Derek and his family, but that story is happening with people who are not noticed, and COVID is on their, may or may not even be on their death certificates, but it is happening every day to hundreds and thousands of other people that are affected this and who are going down the same road that Derek was on.
And again, broadly, we're still feeling the effects beyond just people having COVID. You know, the health service is creaking, after this, unprecedented period. But also, again, not to keep on bringing up public inquiries. We've been having the COVID inquiry and we've been learning the square root of nothing from it because it's been an opportunity for politicians to grandstand and blame each other and for QCs to ask the wrong questions.
There are more modules to come, Benedict.
Well,
Absolutely, there are.
The Prime Minister thought long COVID of the sort that Derek had was non-existent.
Susie, Benedict, thank you both. You're here with us until midnight. Plenty more of this good stuff to come.